Hello everyone. I wanted to take this opportunity to talk to you about standards-based grading. I am hopeful that the information I share with you will give you the background knowledge to better understand the district's move to a standards-based grading system. When we talk about grading in our country, we think about the long-standing tradition of the 100-point scale and A, B, C, D, F. The problem here is that this long-held tradition of grading is very imprecise. This is not new news. We're just now talking about it with the general public. With the advent of standards-based education over the past 10 to 15 years, the traditional system is now being called into question by educational leaders and experts all over the country. So why would anyone want to change current grading practices? Bob Marzano says the answer is quite simple. Grades are so imprecise that they are almost meaningless. When we talk about teaching and learning, we break it down into these areas: curriculum, instruction, and assessment. The current problem we face in education is that we are using standards for the first two, curriculum and instruction, and then using a different system of measure to report the results. Here's a quote from Ken O'Connor, one of the leading thinkers on grading practice. You can see he talks about how in the current system it's about the points, the grade, when we should really be focused on the learning. The bottom line here is that the grade we give students should closely reflect what a student knows and is able to do. Here's a quote from Dufour and Marzano. Here they talk about how 1/3 of the American high school graduates who enter college need remedial courses. They also talk about how nearly 4 out of every 5 of these students had a GPA of 3 or higher, or a B or better. So that tells us that the grades students are getting in classes is not really a close match to what they know or are able to do. Now in Cumberland, we did a similar examination. In one case, we looked at math. We took math scores from students, grades they earned from teachers, and compared those to how they did on the state math test. We did a basic correlation. Now in correlation, 1.0 is perfect. That means that the two variables have a perfect relationship. 0, on the other hand, would mean there is no connection between the two variables. In the case of math at the high school, we found that the grades students received in classes, and comparing that to how they did on the state test, the correlation was 0.16. What that means is there's almost no relationship between the grades students get in the classroom and how they did on the state math test. Let me talk to you briefly about 4 different aspects of traditional grading. First, the letter grades, A, B, C, D, F, all based on the 100-point scale. The difficulty here is there's often a great degree of variation from teacher to teacher. One teacher may give extra credit more than someone else. One teacher may use a 0 more than someone else. In essence, it depends who you get, in many cases, for the kind of grade you get. Who can think back to high school, where we always looked at who we should take, that always being based on certainly how they grade. Secondly, the achievement is often tainted by non-academic factors. An example here is behavior. In the classic traditional system, if a student misbehaves, he may be marked down on his grade. In the standards-based system, we would grade the student for what he knows and is able to do and give a separate grade for his behavior. Thirdly, grading everything and averaging it. The average is often a measure of central tendency that can muddy the waters. It's really not a good indicator of what the student knows, and I'll talk more about that in our next slide or two. Lastly, reporting a single grade. It's called the omnibus grade. Giving one grade simply does not paint a full picture of a student's knowledge base for a certain content area. In a standards-based system, you would give more than one grade. For example, in foreign language, in 85 is the traditional system. That versus maybe getting 3 or 4 grades in foreign language for listening and speaking, etc. Last slide, I talked to you about how the average is not the best means in which to measure student performance. However, as you know, the average is really built into the psyche of our current grading systems. If you are going to use the average, I would point you towards the median or the mode. If you think back to your grade 6 math, we had the mean, median, and mode. Here's an example for you. Let's say here the student has several assessments on the same standard. In most cases here you can see he has an 89. In 2 cases he has a 20. If you take the mean, the average, we have a 75. If we take the median, it's an 89. Which one is a better measure of what he knows? Also, I would add, in many cases in standards-based education, you may not even use any measure of central tendency. You may have an example where a student does really poorly at the start of the semester, but towards the end scores consistently in the A range. Why would you even consider the mean, median, or mode? If he knows the material, why wouldn't you give him what he has earned? Another example, you take a driving test. If you fail one and pass one, do you average them? A few slides back, I told you how giving one grade doesn't really tell the whole story. If you went to a doctor for a physical and he told you were a B+ or an 85, what would you say? Now, in standards-based education, what they're saying is you would get more than one grade. It's more measurable. Here, you have blood pressure, 110/70, pulse, cholesterol, BMI, etc. Which one would you rather have? In this slide, I take you through some of the different grading scales. Up top, you see the scale you know, A, B, C, D, F. Next, also familiar, 95, 85, etc. Look at the F there, 64 to 0. The problem with this 100-point scale system we have is the F can be a variation of 64 to 0. That's a big range. In standards-based education, you can have a 0, but it's mathematically proportional. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, no evidence is fine. But when we give the 0 on the 100-point scale, we are skewing really what the student knows. The third column here, the CS, the MP, NI, I wanted to show you this. Currently in Cumberland in grades 1 and 2, we give the CS is consistently successful, NP making progress. The problem here is we have nothing to back these grades up. A CS in one room may be different than a CS in another room. So it really depends, once again, who you get. Down below, I wanted to illustrate to you that in many cases, the high-stakes tests out there right now are on a standards-based scale or system. First, we have AP, Advanced Placement, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. NECAP, our state test, 4, 3, 2, 1. Teacher Evaluation, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's take the SAT scores. You see the scale there, 200 to 800. That's very much akin to the 4, 3, 2, 1. So really, what you're seeing is all high-stakes testing, or tests that really matter, are standards-based. Here I included a clip from a Mr. Doug Reeves. I wanted Doug to take you through the concept of the 0 and certain other toxic grading practices.
But I don't want to just present a problem without having some solutions. On the left-hand side, you have what I think are toxic practices that we must challenge. When students get zeros for missing work, it is the academic death penalty. And I am more than willing, as a holder of an American passport, to stipulate that Canadian students are just plain better behaved than students from the lower 48. But can I just ask you, even among your best behaved students, have you ever seen one pick up a 0 and say, a 0? I have now seen the light. I shall go forth and sin no more. A 0, I now. Why didn't it occur to me before? I realized the value of time management. Or, with that 0, is their motivation blown? Friends, your worst behavior and discipline problems in November and December are students who had accumulated so many zeros that their semester was over, and they were the ones in your office creating problems. If we want to make this better, we have to have a better solution for missing work that I will introduce in a moment. We have to get rid of the average. I've read the mathematics curriculum of this province. Keep me honest, who teaches fifth grade in this room? Fifth grade. Ma'am, your students learn the mean, the median, and the mode, correct? Because fifth graders in Ontario know that politicians can lie to you with an average. They can misuse statistics. Fifth graders know that the average is not always the best representation of a data set. And yet we let people with advanced degrees use the average all the time as a sole representation of student achievement. Stop using the average. Thirdly, the semester killer, the giant project, the main lab, the big term paper, that 4 weeks, 5 weeks of intensive work destroy an entire semester. Now, I've got some better alternatives here. I've quoted a good deal of research this morning. One educational researcher you may not be familiar with is an unfortunate import from the U.S. called Larry the Cable Guy. Now, I know no one here has watched Larry the Cable Guy on purpose, but you might have accidentally been in front of a television that was accidentally turned to that channel when you saw Larry the Cable Guy give a very thoughtful response to a student who has missing work. He would say, "Get her done. Get her done," which may not sound very elegant, but you want to know what Larry the Cable Guy does? This is, in real schools, what happens. In Lake Taylor High School, a high-poverty urban system, you miss one assignment, you have same-day after-school suspension, not to say, "I will do my homework," but to do the homework. In Hale High School, they give you until Thursday of every week. You get the work done. In more and more elementary and middle schools, there are times before and, yes, during and after school, kids get the work done. The appropriate penalty, don't think for one moment I'm easy. I'm not easy on kids. They should get work done. But the appropriate penalty for missing work is getting the work done. And that's what we can do, and that will have a much better impact on students. Secondly, rather than the average, we use the best representation of people's work. I asked our colleague who coached basketball earlier today about her coaching techniques from the sideline. Has anyone in this room coached track, perhaps? Ma'am, you've coached track. When you coach track, do you decide who to send to the championships at the end of the semester based upon their average time? You do not. She decides who's running best at the end of the season. Let me use an example that hits closer to home. Let your worst nightmare come true, and you're all now graduate students in Professor Reed's Research and Statistics class. And you want to know what September looks like? I hate him and the horse he rode in on. Look, it's been 30 years since I had a math class. I'm teaching social studies. I'm teaching third grade. I'm an administrator. Why should I have to do statistics and research? And October's not much better. And round about the end of November, you mean he's not trying to make me into a propeller head like he is? He's just trying to help me apply research. Now I get it. And you're in my office in December explaining why I should not use the average between now I get it and I hate him. Why I should not use the average for your final grade, and you're right. But if you believe that that's right for you, then for goodness sake, don't do it to students as well. The average doesn't make sense. It assumes linearity, and I've never worked with a linear student in my life. And finally, resilience. You know what? Kids are going to miss assignments. They're going to blow a test. They're going to mess up a project. What lesson do we want to teach them when they meet failure? The lesson I want my children to learn and your children to learn is one of resilience. So the consequence is not merely a low grade. The essence of assessment for learning is that there are serious consequences for messing up. The most serious consequence is not a 0, it's not an F, it's called getting it done. Now I want to tell you, I have actually done this with some students in Western Canada, and I've done this with students elsewhere, and I had focus groups with them, and let me warn you in advance, they hate this. Don't think you'll be being easy on them, they hate it. In their parlance, you know what they say, this precisely. And they just hate it. Why? I heard these words, give me the 0, the operative word being give. Because they're used to simply getting by and maybe a little smiley face will get them a D or something. No. You want to do something really scary, get the work done. And I'm quoting this one young man now because his words were so persuasive to me. It is such a hassle in this school, man. You try to turn this stuff in, she gives it back to you. You miss it, she makes you do it again. You can't even get a D. It's such a hassle in this school, man, to get a C. You might as well get a B. Whereupon we have the wonderful spectacle of whining adolescents bellyaching all the way to the honor roll. That is it, my friends. And let me just remind you, they're not going to thank us. When do students thank us? Years later? This path we are on of assessment for learning is difficult, challenging, unpopular work, but it's the right thing to do.
So let's talk about what standards-based grading is. First, a focus on mastering content standards, not just getting points. It has to be about the learning first, and then the grade. Secondly, a report of what students know and are able to do. The grade we give students has to closely reflect what he or she knows. Next, a balance of formative and summative assessments or mounting evidence. What that means in plain English is we need a lot of pulse checks along the way to measure student progress along with our end-of-course assessments. Take all the evidence together, we spread it out. What does the evidence tell us about what grade the student should get? Is he proficient? Is he above proficient? Where is he? Next, a record-keeping system that informs instruction. Every grade we keep should inform the progress of students on a certain standard. And lastly, a system that encourages student reflection and responsibility for learning. Next, we have a short clip from Rick Romelli. He will take you through a comparison of the 100-point scale, what we currently use, and how that relates to standards-based grading.
Well, that's a really interesting question, this idea of zeros in the 100-point scale. Notice it's not just zeros. It's zeros on the 100-point scale. Because zeros on the 4.0 scale, 3.0, check, check, minus, and zero, those are all fine. Because that zero has an equal influence on all the other numbers if you were to mathematically calculate the grade in some massive aggregate. And that's an issue right there we'll get to in just a moment. But this idea of zeros on the 100-point scale is one of the most controversial issues everywhere I go. And it's born out of this idea of using the 100-point scale as a way to measure and report human progress against a goal with great specificity. It was never meant to do that. It's a bit of a corruption to do that. So let's take a look at some of the reasoning behind not doing it step by step. First, consider, it doesn't matter where you set the line for what each letter grade is. Some school districts, an A is 95 to 100, sometimes it's 94, sometimes it's 93, sometimes it's 90, and sometimes it's 80 to 100. A B is 60 to 79, a C is 40 to 59, a D is 20 to 39, and an F is 19 to 0. Well, they're trying to show that's a 4.0 scale with 20 level increments for each one of the 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Trying to equate 4.0 to 100.0 should teachers need that translation. It's what the community will tolerate. There's not like a set of research data that says an A should be this or a B should be that. Okay, so now the teacher's deciding, I've got this massive F range. Often that's 59 to 0 or 60 to 0 or 65, something like that. Just for the sake of example, we'll say that that's 60 to 0. Okay, so a D would be, the lowest D would be a 51 in that case. Or excuse me, a 61. So now we're thinking, do I give the lowest, most hurtful, and unrecoverable end of the F range, or do I give the most recoverable end of the F range with lots of hope, but nevertheless still an F? We begin to think, do I need degrees or gradations of F-titude? You're a tiny F, you're a large gigantor F. You don't need to do that. Once you're into that F zone, you're in the zone of not there yet. Or no evidence of learning, good reason or bad reason, moral or immoral, it doesn't matter. You have not demonstrated evidence. So in some high schools, there might be no Carnegie unit, no credit given. But whatever it is, good reason or bad, no credit's given. Okay. Well, I have to also teach and grade in such a way as to engender hope. If a kid wants to throw in the ball and go home, I can't teach him because he's divested from my classroom. If a kid gets 1-0, it takes a mammoth pile of perfect 100s just to creep up to the D zone, which falsifies a grade, but also is so overwhelming to most students who are really humans in the morphing that why try? It's just, it's insurmountable to me, and I've got to keep my kids vested. So if I'm trying to decide between a 0 and a 59 or a 60, I'm going to decide on the most hopeful end, but nevertheless an accurate report. This kid has not shown evidence of his learning. An F is an F is an F. I don't need to decide whether it's a gigantic F or a small f, because I'm going to respond the same way. Investigate and take corrective action. Now you might be thinking some of those students will brag. Man, I did nothing at all. I blew it off. You all worked so hard. But me, who did nothing, I still got a 60. Yeah. What's that kid really saying? I did nothing at all. You guys worked hard, but I did nothing, and I still failed. Ooh, that doesn't sound so good. The students are the first ones to realize how absurd this all is, and they don't think they're getting something for having done nothing. That's not even close to the truth. All we're doing is mitigating this extraordinary negative impact. Think about this. What if we gave the A the same influence as we give F's today? 60 to 0? Well, the A is now 60 points. 100 down to 40 is the A range. Well, it'd be actually physically hard to get anything less than straight A's. You would never allow such an outlier of an A to have such a skewing upward influence. You should find it just as absurd to find an F having such a skewing lower influence. We wouldn't do that. If a kid got in the teens, he got a 15 out of 100, and an 18 out of 100, and in one glorious moment of clarity, he got a 98. Mathematically, they would skew him up into the passing range, but you would never tolerate that. That's an idea that Doug Reeves talks about in his writings, and it's worth thinking about. Well, consider this. The grading scale in a lot of places is 190, 80, 70, 60. That's a 4.0 scale, 4, 3, 2, 1. A 2.0, well, basic ratios and proportions that third graders understand, that would be an 80. A 70 would be a 1. 60 on a 100-point scale would be about a 0 on a 4.0 scale. Well, people misapply work ethics. They think, all right, it's a 100-point scale we just did. I'm not going to give you a 60. I'm going to give you nothingness, which is a 0. How many levels is a 0 below failure? Well, it's 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. That's 6 levels below failure. It's not failure, it's 6 levels below. That's the exact same thing as saying on a 4.0 scale, the child doesn't do anything, there's no evidence of learning. Instead of giving him a 0, which would be legitimate, because he has no evidence, he has no credit for doing or learning anything, well, I'm going to give him a -6. In other words, he has to climb 6 levels up just to get even with absolute failure. This is insanity. But wait, it gets worse. Think about this, and I actually heard this from a school board member in Norfolk, Virginia. Think about this. We do the temperature readings for 5 days in June. Now, in Norfolk, Virginia, it's very hot and humid, and we use Fahrenheit. So those of you who do Celsius, you'd have to make the translations. But basically, if we did like 87 one day, 88 another, 84 another, 85 another, oh, Friday, my bad, I totally forgot to take the temperature. So it's a 0. Well, mathematically calculate that all up, and it's 68.8 degrees. Is 68.8 degrees accurate for the weather in Norfolk, Virginia in a hot week in June? Not even close. And grades have to be accurate. You can't mess this up by having a distorted scale that was never used to report, or meant to be used, to report human progress. You're going to have to change the scale so that the 0, the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4, they have equal influence on all the others. But you know what? This is not a big problem, is it? If we disaggregate. What if I had a kid who did nothing or did less than nothing? He got a 47. He got a 0, whatever it was. So I appointed it as a 60. So he gets 60, 60, 60. And in one, again, glorious moment of clarity, he gets 100. Yeah! And then 60, 60. If you average that all together, he could actually pass. Nothingness, nothingness, no evidence, no evidence, no evidence, lots of evidence, no evidence, no evidence. He could technically pass, but that's only if you average. One of the things we've learned in differentiated classrooms and in standards-based grading is we no longer use mean or averaging. We use central tendency, the most consistent level of performance over time. And it turns out that has a much higher correlation with any kind of testing that will be done on that student outside of your classroom. So if you really want to have integrity in your grades, they mean something, and you don't want to falsify the report of what a kid knows, you'll want to disaggregate. In this standard, there's no evidence. In this standard, there's evidence. That's criterion referenced. And it no longer becomes an issue. 0s on the 100-point scale if you stop doing the averaging and actually increase the accuracy, the truth, and the usefulness of your letter grades.
What is a learning standard? Essentially, standards are agreed upon statements of which a student should know and be able to do in a given content area. An example here I give you is kindergarten math. Count to 100 by ones and tens. In standards-based education, every teacher in kindergarten is focusing on that standard of counting to 100 by ones and tens. It makes it so we have continuity across the grade levels in a district. One of the key questions we have to ask is, what is it we want all students to learn by grade level, by course, and by unit? We have to think about really drilling down to what matters most. Now, in education, we have many standards and many things to consider. The process we're going through here in Cumberland now is really drilling down to what's called the power standards, or what matters most. That's the inside circle called the enduring understandings. Here in my example, on the outside circle we have things worth being familiar with. Let's take the Civil War. Certainly historical figures, key battles, worth being familiar with. The second circle, more important to know and do, possibly understanding the many causes of the war and applying that. But to me, the most important piece for the Civil War would be the Civil War as a key element in shaping our country today, and how still there are pieces in our daily fabric that are alive and well in our country around the Civil War. So in the end, we want to go through this process with all of our content areas and really drill down to what matters most. Another key aspect in standards-based grading is that of being consistent in how we judge work. First, can we agree on the criteria by which we judge the quality of student work? I can tell you in Cumberland, over the past year, we did create common rubrics for all kinds of writing at all grade levels. So a piece of writing that's proficient at Cumberland Hill is also proficient at B.F. Norton. Secondly, can we apply those criteria consistently? The fancy word there is inter-rater reliability. In this clip, Ken O'Connor talks about 4 conditions which he believes are important in terms of grading practice.
And so I believe that the essential question that we have to ask about grades and grading is this: how confident are you that the grades that students get in your schools, in your school districts, meet these 4 conditions? Because I believe that these are the conditions of quality for grades. For grades to be effective, they need to be consistent, accurate, meaningful, and supportive of learning. First of all, they need to be consistent. It shouldn't be a matter of chance whether a student is in teacher X or teacher Y's class. If they're achieving at the same level, they should get the same grade. And unfortunately, that often has not been the case, because teachers have had very different ideas about what ingredients should go into grades, and they've had very different ideas about performance standards. And as a result, students who have been achieving at the same level have frequently got the same grades. And in any system, but especially in a standards-based system, I think we have to see that as being unacceptable. Secondly, grades need to be accurate. Very important decisions are made about and by students on the basis of grades. For those to be good decisions, they need to be based on accurate information. And of course, grades basically result from combining a whole lot of information, most commonly into a single symbol. Anytime we scrunch information in that way, there's a real danger that we lose accuracy. So we need to think about what contributes to accuracy. And so that's a second really important condition. Third, and somewhat similar but a little bit different, is, are they meaningful? As much as is possible for a summary symbol, does it give information about students' achievement of learning goals? And fourth, and I believe most importantly, are they supportive of learning? Is what we are doing in the assessment and learning process making it obvious to everybody involved, students, parents, teachers, that the focus of what we're doing is on learning? That school, put a little tritely, is a learning game, not a grading game. And I think we will know when we have got somewhere with this when we find we have students and parents coming to us and saying, not what can I do to improve my grade, but what can I do to improve my learning. And ultimately that's, I think, where we want to get to, and hopefully we'll get there fairly soon in a very general way.
Now let's look at how this grading practice looks at the high school level. First, let me dispel some rumor I've heard out there. In this system, there is both a GPA, a grade point average, and a class rank. As you may know, these are two aspects colleges do consider in the application process for a college admission. In this slide, we have three examples of students with a calculated GPA. In the first slide, we see a top student. You can see in the second grade, the psychology AP level, the student earned a 4. He then received 1.5 points for the level of course, and that equates to a 5.5. All totaled up, you can see it's 5.0625 for the GPA. In the second example, we see a top 30 student. You can do the math there and see it's a 4.75. And we have a top 100 student with a 4.6. So you can see there is GPA. There is still a sorting of students from first to 30th to 100th, etc. A common question asked is, what do the colleges think? Here on this slide is a good example of some research from the Hanover Research Council study that speaks to this question. I would have you look at the list of schools they talk to: Princeton, Yale, MIT, Stanford, Duke, Northwestern, Cornell, UVA, a very comprehensive list of schools with a research-based result. The conclusion of the study is on this slide. As you can see, the Hanover study says all grades were seen as welcome indicators of performance. They also recognize how schools have unique perspectives and systems. So a B in one school, more often than not, is not the same as a B in another school. The last line. None of the college admissions offices contacted expressed a concern or a negative view of a transcript based on standards-based grading. Still skeptical? I have homework for you. Try to Google, find any credible organization or researcher that tells you the 100-point scale is best practice in education today. I wanted to end this slideshow with a short clip from a teacher that I think really hits the mark with what we're trying to do here in Cumberland. As always, I welcome your phone calls, emails, and I'm happy to meet with you to discuss this work or any other aspect of our education program here in Cumberland.
Today I want to share with you something I've learned about standards-based grading over the last few years, and something that can be called the game of school. Some people call it that. The game of school has many moves. One of the opening moves is this question that I hear quite often, way too often. Did I miss anything important? Well, maybe it was this. Maybe you missed this. Or this. I think those are important. Oh, but this. Now this is really important. And what I found is that students have become fixated on filling out papers and getting grades. And that's the opening move of the game of school. The game of school has other moves too, like what can I do for extra credit? Hear that one a lot. We throw carrots out there. That's the carrot. But then we have sticks, like the late grade, or the ultimate stick, the 0. I believe that we can end the game and increase success by using standards-based grading and help more students succeed in school. So what this really means is connecting a learning target, a standard, with every grade. Every grade is connected to a standard. We used to call them behavioral objectives. Today we call them learning targets, and we put an I can in front of them. Same thing, really. And I've been using them for my whole career, but only in the last couple years have I come to the realization that maybe every grade I put in the grade book needs to have one of these associated with it, no matter what it is. So, with every lab that we do, every activity, whatever, it's always going to be connected to one of these learning targets. So with the help of Robert Marzano and Rick Wormelli, over the last year I've come up with a plan that involves the following. 4-point scale, which minimizes the effect of the 0. Formative assessment, helping the students know what they need to do to succeed. Every assessment involves telling the students what they need to do better. Flexible formative grades, which means that grades can be upgraded at any time. Just prove to me that you can meet the target and we'll raise the grade. Collaboratively written rubrics. The students help me write the rubrics that allow them to know exactly what it takes to get a 4. And summative exams. Once we've spent all the time going over everything and everybody's prepared, it's a higher weighted grade for the summative exam. Now, I have a little data here over the last few years. At the very least, I can say that this has affected my bottom line, okay? That bottom line. Here's a very strange distribution from a few years ago. I picked at random. And here's one from this year. Here's one that looks a little more normal, if you can call it that. And here's another one from this year. I think it's a dramatic improvement, at least in this bottom line. What I try to tell the students is show me what you know and I will assess it. That's my message to them. Use any method you want. Show me what you know and I will assess it. I will help you learn. And what I try to tell parents is, what can I do to help your student learn this? In IEPs, in CSTs, and whatever. This is now the message. Whereas the message used to be this. Your kid does not turn in work. Over and over and over again for years and years and years. This is no longer an issue because I can assess every student regardless of whether that paper got lost or not. So this one's no more. But by far the biggest, I think, maybe a sign of the influence this can have on my students came from a young man this year who, after the first quarter, came up to me and told me this. I can't believe I'm not failing. Obviously a student who was really used to the game of school on the negative side. And my only response was simply, I can. Thank you.